In 793, a storm of dragon-headed ships descended on an English monastery. The Vikings had arrived, and within 3 generations, these raiders from the north would control territory stretching from North America to the gates of Constantinople. They raided, traded, and conquered, leaving their mark on almost every corner of the known world. They settled Iceland, ruled Dublin, conquered England, raided Paris, served as elite guards to Byzantine emperors, and founded Russia. But in 1066, 3 battles in 3 countries would destroy Viking power forever. This is the story of how a small population from the harsh fjords of Scandinavia nearly conquered the medieval world, and why their empire crumbled just as they reached their peak. The Vikings were not a single unified people, but a tapestry of warrior clans, farmers, traders, and explorers hailing from the rugged lands of Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. From the late 8th to the early 11th century, they burst onto the world stage with a ferocity and ambition that left a permanent mark on history. But who were these Norsemen, and what drove them to sail beyond their icy fjords into uncharted territories? Life in Scandinavia during the Viking Age was harsh. The land was cold and unforgiving, with limited arable farmland to sustain growing populations. Survival often meant ingenuity, resilience, and a willingness to take risks. This scarcity, combined with a cultural thirst for adventure and glory, fueled their outward expansion. While the Vikings are often remembered as savage raiders, they were far more complex. They were craftsmen and seafarers, their ships masterpieces of design, sleek, fast, and capable of navigating both oceans and shallow rivers. The term Viking itself is derived from the Old Norse word vikinga, which roughly translates to pirate or raider. But raiding was only one facet of their identity. When they weren't plundering monasteries or striking fear into European hearts, they were trading valuable goods like amber, furs, and silver. Their trade networks stretched as far as the Byzantine Empire, connecting them with cultures as diverse as the Arabs and the Franks. The Vikings' spirituality also shaped their worldview. They believed in a pantheon of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, whose tales were filled with quests for power, wisdom, and honor. These beliefs instilled in them a sense of fate and bravery, making them fearless in battle. Death in combat wasn't feared, but embraced, as it promised entry into Valhalla, Odin's great hall of warriors. But the question remains, why did the Vikings venture so far from their homeland? Part of the answer lies in opportunity. The fractured kingdoms of Europe offered ripe targets for their swift, unpredictable raids. But equally, the lure of wealth, fertile lands, and fame pulled them outward. Whether through trade, conquest, or settlement, the Vikings set their sights on the world, and for a time, it seemed as if nothing could stop them. The Vikings were unparalleled in their ambition to explore and conquer new territories. Their expansion was not a random series of raids, but a calculated movement that stretched across vast regions, leaving an indelible mark on history. From the windswept shores of North America to the bustling trade cities of Constantinople, the Vikings ventured farther than almost any other group of their time. The first wave of Viking expansion began in the west. In 793 AD, the Vikings launched their infamous raid on Lindisfarne, a peaceful monastery on the northeastern coast of England. This event shocked Christendom and marked the beginning of the Viking Age. From there, they began raiding and settling across Britain and Ireland, establishing a stronghold in what became known as the Danelaw, a region of England under Viking control. They also founded key cities such as Dublin, which became a center of trade and Norse culture. The Vikings didn't stop with Britain. Their longships carried them further west across the Atlantic Ocean to the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, the son of Erik the Red, is believed to have led a Viking expedition to North America, where they established a short-lived settlement in Vinland, likely modern-day Newfoundland. Though their North American colonies didn't last, this feat made the Vikings the first Europeans to set foot on the continent, nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. While their western exploits are well known, the Vikings also expanded eastward. Along the rivers of modern-day Russia, they established trade routes connecting Scandinavia to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic caliphates. These waterways allowed the Vikings, often referred to as the Rus in this region, to dominate trade between the Baltic and Black Seas. Some even served as elite warriors in the Byzantine Emperor's personal guard, known as the Varangian Guard. The Vikings' expansion into Europe also saw them carve out territory in France. In 911 AD, the Viking leader Rollo was granted land by the French king Charles the Simple in exchange for loyalty and protection. This region became Normandy, a name derived from Northmen, and its descendants would later play a pivotal role in European history, including the Norman conquest of England in 1066. By land, river, and sea, the Vikings reached farther than anyone thought possible, creating a legacy of exploration and conquest that still fascinates us today. The Vikings were more than just fierce warriors. They were tactical geniuses who combined advanced technology, psychological warfare, and sheer audacity to dominate their enemies. Their success on the battlefield wasn't merely a product of brute force. It was the result of a carefully honed system that made them one of the most feared fighting forces of their time. At the heart of Viking warfare was their legendary longship. These sleek, versatile vessels were engineering marvels, capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers. This allowed the Vikings to strike with unparalleled speed and unpredictability. Coastal towns, monasteries, and river settlements were particularly vulnerable to their lightning-fast raids. The sight of a dragon-proud ship on the horizon was enough to send entire villages into a panic, long before a single sword was drawn. Once on land, the Vikings used their mobility to devastating effect. They favored swift, hit-and-run attacks, avoiding prolonged battles whenever possible. Their ability to adapt to any terrain, be it dense forests, open plains, or fortified cities, made them highly versatile in combat. Their raids were often timed strategically, targeting weak points in their enemies' defenses when they were least prepared. The Vikings' weapons and armor also gave them a significant edge. Armed with axes, swords, and spears, their equipment was both practical and deadly. The iconic Viking battle axe, with its long handle and razor-sharp blade, was particularly effective for breaking shields and armor. They also used round wooden shields, which were not only defensive tools but could be used offensively in close combat. While some Vikings wore chainmail and helmets, many relied on their agility and ferocity to overwhelm their opponents. Beyond their tools and tactics, the Vikings' mentality set them apart. They believed in a warrior ethos rooted in Norse mythology, where death in battle was seen as an honorable path to Valhalla. This fearless attitude made them nearly unstoppable on the battlefield, as they fought with little regard for their own lives. Perhaps their greatest strength, however, was their adaptability. Vikings were quick to adopt new techniques, weapons, and strategies from the cultures they encountered. This flexibility, combined with their fearsome reputation and superior tactics, made the Vikings a force to be reckoned with, one that even the mightiest kingdoms struggled to contain. The Viking way of war wasn't just about conquest, it was about domination, both physical and psychological. Their unmatched prowess ensured their place in history as some of the most effective warriors the world has ever seen. The Vikings' history is punctuated by epic moments where their ambition and power brought them dangerously close to total domination. These pivotal events highlight not only their military might, but also their cunning and determination to reshape the world in their favor. One of the most dramatic episodes in Viking history was the Siege of Paris in 845 AD. Led by the legendary chieftain Ragnar Lothbrok, the Vikings arrived with a fleet of 120 ships, carrying thousands of warriors up the Seine River. Paris, then a small but strategically significant city, was utterly unprepared for the ferocity of the Viking assault. Using a combination of brute force and psychological warfare, Ragnar laid waste to the surrounding countryside, spreading fear and chaos. The French king, Charles the Bald, had no choice but to pay an enormous ransom of 7,000 pounds of silver to make the Vikings leave, a staggering sum that only emboldened them to target other wealthy cities. Another critical moment came with the Great Heathen Army in 865 AD. Unlike the sporadic raids of earlier years, this was a coordinated invasion of Anglo-Saxon England by a massive Viking force. Led by renowned leaders like Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, the army devastated several English kingdoms. Their most significant victories included the capture of York and the defeat of King Edmund of East Anglia. At their height, the Vikings controlled vast swathes of England, forcing even the resilient King Alfred of Wessex to retreat into the marshes before mounting a counterattack. In France, the Vikings didn't just raid, they settled. In 911 AD, the Viking leader Rollo struck a deal with King Charles the Simple, securing the territory that would become Normandy. This wasn't merely a concession, but a strategic move that gave the Vikings a permanent foothold in Europe. Rollo and his descendants embraced local customs and Christianity, blending Viking and Frankish cultures to form a powerful duchy. The Vikings' reach extended even to the Byzantine Empire, where they established themselves as elite warriors in the Varangian Guard. These Norse mercenaries were renowned for their loyalty and ferocity, serving as the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors and influencing one of history's greatest empires. Through these key moments, the Vikings showcased their ability to adapt, organize, and dominate on an unprecedented scale. Though their near dominance would ultimately falter, These events cemented their legacy as a force that came closer than anyone expected to conquering the known world. The Vikings seemed unstoppable at the height of their power, raiding and conquering lands across Europe and even North America. Their dominance was not destined to last. A combination of internal struggles, external resistance, and cultural changes ultimately brought the Viking Age to an end, leaving behind a legacy rather than an empire. One of the key reasons for the decline of Viking dominance was internal conflict. While the Vikings were highly effective as raiders and warriors, they were not a unified people. Rivalries among clans and leaders often led to infighting, weakening their ability to sustain large-scale conquests. Without a cohesive strategy, Viking forces were often divided, which made them vulnerable to stronger, unified opponents. Additionally, as some Vikings settled in newly conquered lands, such as Normandy and parts of England, they became more focused on local governance and less on expansion. Another significant factor was the rise of better defenses among their enemies. Early Viking raids succeeded largely because their targets were unprepared for the speed and ferocity of their attacks. However, over time, European kingdoms learned to defend themselves. The English, for instance, under leaders like King Alfred the Great, constructed fortified towns, or burhs, which made it harder for Vikings to raid and retreat successfully. Similarly, coastal fortifications and improved naval defenses reduced the Vikings' ability to strike with impunity. The Vikings were also impacted by cultural and religious shifts. As they interacted with Christian Europe, many Vikings converted to Christianity, either voluntarily or through political necessity. This conversion marked a profound shift in their identity. The Christianization of the Vikings diminished the cultural drive for raiding and conquest, which had been fueled by Norse pagan beliefs, including the promise of glory in Valhalla for warriors who died in battle. Economic changes also played a role. As Europe stabilized politically, trade became more structured, and the opportunities for looting diminished. Vikings who had relied on raiding for wealth found it harder to sustain their lifestyle. Finally, geopolitical changes reduced the Vikings' power. The emergence of stronger kingdoms, such as the unified England under King Ethelstan and the Holy Roman Empire, presented formidable challenges to Viking ambitions. By the mid-11th century, the Viking Age had effectively ended, but their influence endured, shaping the cultural and political landscapes of the regions they had touched. Their legacy remains a testament to their extraordinary impact on history. Although the Viking Age came to an end in the 11th century, the legacy of the Vikings continues to resonate in the modern world. Their impact is not only evident in the places they conquered and settled, but also in the cultural, genetic, and historical footprints they left behind. The Vikings were not merely raiders, they were also skilled traders, explorers, and settlers who contributed to the development of the regions they touched. For example, in England, the influence of Norse language can still be seen in modern English. Words like sky, window, and knife are derived from Old Norse, a testament to the integration of Viking culture into the Anglo-Saxon world. Similarly, in Normandy, the blending of Norse and Frankish traditions created a unique culture that would later give rise to the Norman conquest of England in 1066. The Vikings also left behind a genetic footprint. Modern DNA studies have shown that the Viking expansion left a lasting mark on the populations of the British Isles and even parts of Russia. In regions like Iceland, where the Vikings settled extensively, genetic studies reveal a mix of Norse and Celtic ancestry, reflecting the blending of cultures during this time. Another aspect of their legacy is their maritime and navigational expertise. The Viking longship is a symbol of their ingenuity, and its design influenced shipbuilding for centuries. Their ability to traverse vast distances, from the icy waters of Greenland to the rivers of Eastern Europe, demonstrated an unparalleled understanding of navigation and engineering. This legacy of exploration has inspired countless adventurers and explorers throughout history. Perhaps the most enduring element of the Viking legacy is their mythology and storytelling. Norse mythology continues to captivate audiences worldwide. Finally, the Vikings reshaped the political landscape of Europe. By founding cities, establishing trade routes, and influencing local governance, they laid the groundwork for the development of nations like England, Russia, and France. Though their era of dominance ended nearly a millennium ago, the Vikings' legacy endures, reminding us of their extraordinary achievements and the lasting impact of their remarkable age.